Mafia boss's date left him for being disabled, but a passing widow sat with him instead. A feared Mafia boss survives an ambush that leaves him in a wheelchair and ready to disappear forever. His men set him up on one last date, hoping to remind him he's still a man. But the moment she sees his disability, she walks out and leaves him alone at the table. Then something unexpected happens. A grieving widow from across the room sits down beside him. She doesn't know who he is. She just sees a broken man and listens. What she doesn't know is that he's lying. He's not ordinary. He's dangerous. And the moment he lets her into his life, enemies start watching. Now he must choose. Tell her the truth and risk losing her, or protect her with blood and secrets she may never forgive. When love is built on a lie this deadly, can it survive the truth, or will it get her killed? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The midnight stillness of St. Michael's Private Medical Center shattered as the emergency doors burst open. A cluster of dark-suited men moved as one unit surrounding a stretcher that carried their fallen leader. Blood stained the pristine white sheets, spreading like spilled wine across Italian silk. Marco DeLuca's normally sharp eyes were unfocused, his face ashen beneath his olive complexion. The fluorescent lights above blurred into streaks as they rushed him down sterile corridors. His men's faces were grim masks, their silence more telling than words could ever be. "What happened?" a nurse demanded as she fell into step beside them. One of Marco's enforcers, a broad-shouldered man with a fresh cut above his eye, answered tersely. "Security incident, that's all you need to know." The world spun in and out of focus for Marco. Sharp voices pierced the fog of his consciousness, clinical terms mixing with the steady beep of monitors. The operating room lights blazed overhead, harsh and unforgiving. Multiple gunshot wounds, severe trauma to the spinal column. Darkness claimed him, then released him over and over. Each time he surfaced, there was only pressure, voices, and a growing awareness that something was terribly wrong. His legs. He couldn't feel his legs. Hours later, maybe days, time had lost all meaning. Marco opened his eyes to find Dr. Catherine Chen standing at his bedside. Her face bore the careful neutrality that doctors perfect when delivering life-changing news. "Mr. DeLuca," she began, her voice steady and professional. "The surgery was successful in saving your life, but I need to be direct about the extent of your injuries." Marco's throat felt like sandpaper. "Tell me." "The damage to your spinal cord is permanent. The bullets caused irreversible trauma at the T10 vertebrae level." She paused, meeting his eyes with unwavering professionalism. "You will never walk again." The words hit like another bullet, but Marco's face remained impassive. Years of controlling his emotions in the face of threats served him well now. Inside, though, something broke. A piece of himself he hadn't known could shatter. "Leave," he ordered, his voice rough but commanding. Dr. Chen nodded once and stepped out, closing the door quietly behind her. Only then did Marco allow his hand to clench into a fist, his knuckles white with suppressed rage. The next weeks passed in a blur of physical therapy, medical consultations, and carefully controlled fury. His men remained vigilant, guarding his room with doubled security, but Marco could see the shift in their eyes, concern mixed with something else, something that made his jaw clench every time he caught it. Pity. They wheeled in state-of-the-art equipment, brought in the best specialists money could buy. Marco endured it all with stoic determination, but each day, the reality of his new existence cut deeper. His body, once a weapon honed to lethal perfection, now betrayed him in the most fundamental ways. At night, when the hospital fell quiet, except for the soft footsteps of nurses and the distant beeping of monitors, Marco would lie awake, his mind racing. He thought of his empire, built through cunning and force, the respect he'd earned through fear and power. How quickly would that respect turn to weakness in the eyes of his enemies? Finally, after weeks of rehabilitation, Marco returned to his penthouse. The space that had once felt like a throne room now seemed vast and foreign. His enforcers had modified everything. Wider doorways, adjusted counter heights, elegant ramps disguised as architectural features. Every change, though necessary, was a reminder of what he'd lost. That evening, as the sun set over the city, Marco sat in his wheelchair before the floor-to-ceiling windows. The cityscape spread out before him, a glittering empire of lights and shadows that had once been his to command. The reflection in the glass showed a man he barely recognized, still powerful in build, but contained now in ways he'd never imagined. His hands gripped the wheelchair's arms, feeling the smooth leather under his palms. Below his waist, nothing, just emptiness where strength used to be. The city lights blurred as he stared out, not from emotion. Marco DeLuca didn't allow himself such weakness, but from the growing certainty of what he had to do. His empire would crumble if his enemies sensed weakness. Already he could imagine the whispers starting, the circling vultures waiting to test his defenses. The DeLuca name had been feared for generations, but fear required strength, or at least the appearance of it. A decision crystallized in his mind, cold and clear as ice. Before anyone could see him like this, before the whispers could start, he would disappear. Let them wonder, let them fear the unseen threat. Better to be a shadow that might strike from anywhere than a crippled king on display. Marco's reflection stared back at him, hard and uncompromising. His shoulders were still broad, his face still carved from stone, but his eyes held a new darkness. The world he'd built, the power he'd amassed, the respect he'd commanded, none of it felt like his anymore. Not like this. The city continued to glitter beyond the glass, oblivious to the plans forming in the mind of the man who had once ruled its shadows. The old Marco DeLuca had died in that ambush. Now it was time to decide what would rise in his place. His phone lay untouched on the side table, dozens of messages waiting for responses, reports needing approval, decisions requiring his input, allies seeking reassurance. All of it would have to wait. First, he needed to vanish, to rebuild himself in a way that would make his disability irrelevant. The silence of the penthouse wrapped around him like a shroud. His men stood guard outside, loyal but unnecessary now. No one would dare attack him here, in his fortress in the sky. But it wasn't physical threats that concerned him anymore. It was the perception of weakness, the slow poison of doubt that could destroy everything he'd built. Hours passed as Marco sat motionless, watching his city. Each light that winked out in the distance felt like another piece of his former life slipping away. By the time the first hints of dawn began to pale the eastern sky, his plan was set. He would disappear, leaving only whispers and shadows behind. Let them wonder where he was, what he was planning. Fear of the unknown was always stronger than fear of a visible threat. The wheelchair no longer felt foreign under his hands as he turned away from the windows. It was simply another tool now, like his guns had been, like his fists had been. He would adapt, evolve, become something new, something that didn't need legs to be lethal. But first, he had to vanish. The world needed to forget Marco DeLuca, as he had been, before they could learn to fear what he would become. Marco woke to the soft glow of morning filtering through his penthouse windows. Sleep had been elusive, his mind churning with plans for his disappearance. The weight of the empire he'd built pressed down on him, heavier than ever now that he sat rather than stood beneath it. His morning routine had been modified, streamlined by necessity. Everything took longer now, required more thought, more planning. His enforcers waited outside, their presence both comforting and suffocating. They were too well trained to show pity, but he felt it anyway, lurking beneath their stoic expressions. At precisely 9 o'clock, his consigliere, Antonio, arrived with the inner circle. 6 men who had been with him through blood and fire, who had helped build the DeLuca empire from the ground up. They filed into his study, their faces carefully neutral as they took in his wheelchair behind the massive desk. "I'm stepping back," Marco announced without preamble. His voice was steady, betraying none of the turmoil beneath. Temporarily, for recovery. The silence that followed was deafening. Antonio's weathered face creased with concern, while the others exchanged glances that spoke volumes. They knew him too well to believe this was temporary. "The business," one of them began. "Will continue as usual," Marco cut in. "Nothing changes except my physical presence." "With respect, boss," another spoke up. "Your presence is everything. The other families will wait," Marco's voice carried the steel that had made him feared throughout the city. "Or they'll learn that wheels don't make me any less dangerous." But even as he spoke, he could see the doubt in their eyes. These men, his most trusted circle, were already calculating the risks, measuring the weakness they perceived. If they could see it, others would too. The meeting dissolved into arguments, carefully worded at first, then growing heated. Factions formed before his eyes. Those who supported his decision to step back, those who insisted he needed to maintain a strong public presence. Through it all, Marco sat silent, watching the empire he'd built begin to fracture. As the others filed out, Antonio remained behind. The old consigliere had been with the DeLuca family since Marco was a boy, and he was the only one who dared speak the truth. "They smell blood in the water," Antonio said quietly. Not just our enemies, but our own people. You need to show them you're still the man they feared and respected." "I'm not that man anymore," Marco replied, his hands gripping the wheelchair's arms. "We both know it." Antonio's face softened with an expression Marco couldn't bear to see. "You're still Marco DeLuca. The chair doesn't change who you are inside." A harsh laugh escaped Marco's throat. "Tell that to the last woman who saw me like this." The abandoned date, a society woman who'd been pursuing him for months, had taken one look at him in the wheelchair and made a hasty excuse about a family emergency. Her pity had been worse than rejection. Antonio was quiet for a moment, then said carefully, "Perhaps what you need is to remember you're still desirable. Still a man." Marco's eyes narrowed. "What are you suggesting?" "A dinner. Very discreet, very private. I know someone who can arrange it. A blind date, with a woman who has no connection to our world, no preconceptions. So she can what? Run screaming when she sees the chair?" The bitterness in Marco's voice surprised even him. "So you can see yourself through fresh eyes," Antonio countered. "One evening. What do you have to lose?" Everything, Marco thought, but he was already losing it anyway. "Fine," he said finally. "One dinner. But if this goes badly—" "It won't," Antonio assured him, already pulling out his phone. "Trust me, Marco. Sometimes what we need most is to be seen as we truly are." The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of arrangements. Antonio's contacts worked quickly, securing a private room at La Stella, an upscale restaurant known for its discretion. Marco's security team swept the location twice, ensuring every entrance and exit was accessible, every possible threat accounted for. As evening approached, Marco found himself subjected to the ministrations of his personal staff. They dressed him in a tailored black suit that had been modified for sitting, every detail perfect from his Italian leather shoes to his platinum cufflinks. The mirror showed him a man who looked powerful, wealthy, commanding, from the waist up. His enforcers moved with practiced efficiency, escorting him to the elevator, then to the waiting car. The city lights blurred past the tinted windows as they drove, and Marco felt the familiar weight of his gun against his ribs, a comfort he wasn't ready to give up. The restaurant's private entrance was well lit but secluded, the ramp discreet enough to look like an architectural choice rather than an accommodation. Inside, the maitre d' greeted him with perfect professionalism, no hint of surprise or pity in his expression. As Marco was shown to the private dining room, he could feel his pulse quickening. Not from fear, Marco DeLuca had never feared anything in his life, but from anticipation of the humiliation to come. He imagined the woman's face when she saw him, the polite excuse she would make, the pity in her eyes. His enforcers took up positions outside the room, invisible but present. The table was perfectly set, the lighting intimate, the wine already breathing in crystal decanters. Everything was perfect, which would make the inevitable failure all the more bitter. Marco positioned himself at the table, adjusting his position to appear as natural as possible. His hands, still strong and capable, arranged the silverware with precise movements. The door would open any minute now, and he would see in a stranger's eyes what he had become. The minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness. Each passing moment felt like another weight added to his shoulders. He had faced down rival families, survived assassination attempts, built an empire from nothing. But this simple dinner made him feel more vulnerable than he had ever been. Through the door, he could hear the soft murmur of voices, his security team, no doubt vetting the arrival of his dinner companion. Marco straightened his spine, lifted his chin, prepared himself for what was to come. He was still Marco DeLuca, feared and respected throughout the city. But as the door handle began to turn, he couldn't help but wonder if that would be enough anymore. The soft lighting caught the polished wood of the door as it began to open, and Marco drew in a steady breath. Whatever happened next would either be the first step toward reclaiming his life or the final confirmation that it was time to disappear completely. Either way, there would be no turning back after tonight. The private dining room at La Stella hummed with soft lighting and gentle music, creating an intimate atmosphere that now felt suffocating to Marco. His security team's voices murmured outside. Then the door opened. His date, Amanda, according to Antonio's briefing, walked in with confident steps. She was exactly the type his advisors would choose, elegant in a designer dress, professionally styled blonde hair, perfect makeup. For one brief moment, her smile seemed genuine. Then her gaze dropped to the wheelchair. Marco watched the transformation happen in slow motion, the way her smile froze, then faltered, how her eyes widened before quickly looking away. He had seen that look before, in the faces of his own men when they first visited him in the hospital. But from them, It had been tempered with loyalty. From her, it was pure discomfort. "Oh, I didn't realize." Amanda's manicured fingers clutched her purse tighter. "Please sit," Marco said, his voice carrying the same authority it always had, even as something twisted in his chest. One of his men moved forward to pull out her chair, but she remained standing. "I should have been told," she said, not quite meeting his eyes. "This isn't... I'm not..." "Not what?" The words came out sharp enough to make her flinch. "Not prepared to have dinner with someone in a wheelchair?" "That's not what I meant." But her body language, the way she kept shifting her weight, glancing at the door, said otherwise. This isn't what I expected." A waiter appeared with wine, oblivious to the tension. "Shall I pour for the lady?" "No need," Amanda said quickly. "I actually just remembered. I have an early meeting tomorrow. I should go." The excuse was paper thin, but Marco didn't challenge it. He sat perfectly still, his face a mask of indifference that had taken years to perfect. "Of course! Don't let me keep you!" She fled more than walked, her heels clicking rapidly across the floor. The door closed behind her with a soft click that somehow echoed louder than a gunshot. Marco stared at the empty chair across from him, the untouched place setting mocking everything he'd lost. The waiter hovered uncertainly until Marco dismissed him with a sharp gesture. He wanted to flip the table, to shatter every piece of crystal, to make the outside world match the violence raging inside him. Instead, he sat motionless, because that's what men like him did. They contained the storm, controlled it, channeled it, even when everything inside them was breaking. Time stretched like cold molasses. The wine breathed forgotten in its decanter. His phone buzzed once, probably Antonio checking in, but Marco ignored it. He should leave, should call his men, return to his fortress of a penthouse, and set in motion his plans to disappear. But leaving meant wheeling past the main dining room, meant being seen, meant confirming every whisper about his weakness. So he stayed, a king without a kingdom, in his private little cell of a dining room. Through the partially open door, he caught glimpses of other diners, couples leaning close, business associates making deals, families celebrating. Normal people living normal lives. His eyes kept returning to one table in particular, where a woman sat alone. She wasn't like Amanda. No designer dress or perfect styling. Her dark hair fell in natural waves, her black dress simple but elegant. There was something in the way she held herself, a quiet dignity that spoke of someone who had faced loss and emerged stronger. More than once he caught her glancing his way, not with pity or revulsion, but with something closer to recognition, like she understood something about silence and empty chairs and meals eaten alone. Marco watched her finish her meal, declining dessert with a small shake of her head. He expected her to leave then, to disappear like everyone else had. Instead, she stood, picked up her half-full wine glass, and walked directly toward his private room. His security team tensed, but Marco waved them down. The woman paused in the doorway, her dark eyes meeting his without flinching. "I'm Luna," she said simply. "Would you mind some company?" There was no pity in her voice, no forced cheerfulness or awkward hesitation, just a straightforward question that somehow acknowledged both his solitude and his right to refuse. Marco studied her for a long moment. She waited patiently, neither advancing nor retreating, holding her wine glass like it was both shield and offering. In her face, he saw echoes of his own losses, different perhaps, but just as deep. She wore her grief like he wore his power, with quiet certainty rather than display, and in her eyes was something he hadn't seen since before the shooting, simple recognition of his humanity, neither more nor less than what he was. The silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, but weighted with possibility. The storm inside him stilled, not because it was gone, but because something else had captured its attention. Something in the way she stood there, unafraid and undemanding, offering connection without requirement. His security team waited for his signal, ready to remove her at the slightest indication. But Marco found himself wanting to hear what this woman, this Luna, would say next. Wanting to know what made her walk across a restaurant to sit with a stranger who radiated danger and isolation. The crystal glasses on the table caught the light, throwing prisms across the white tablecloth. Somewhere in the main dining room, someone laughed. Music played softly, barely audible, above the murmur of conversations and the clink of silverware. And in that moment, in that doorway, everything waited on his answer. Luna stood perfectly still, her question hanging in the air between them. She didn't fidget or look away, didn't try to fill the silence with nervous chatter. She simply waited, holding her wine glass, offering possibility without pressure. The contrast between this moment and Amanda's hasty exit couldn't have been starker. Where one woman had fled from what she saw as brokenness, another had walked toward what she recognized as shared humanity. Where one had seen only limitation, another saw something worth knowing. Marco's hand moved to rest on the arm of his wheelchair, not to hide it, but simply to be. In that gesture was acceptance of both what he had lost and what remained. His voice, when he finally spoke, carried all the authority of his position, but softened by something that might have been curiosity. But her presence had already changed the atmosphere of the room, transformed it from a place of isolation to one of potential. The private dining room that had felt like a prison now felt like a space where new stories might begin. Luna settled into the chair across from Marco, her movements graceful and unhurried. The private dining room felt different now, transformed from a cage of isolation into an intimate space where secrets could be shared. "Thank you," she said, placing her wine glass on the crisp, white tablecloth. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all." Marco's voice was deep, rougher than she expected. "Though I have to wonder why you'd choose to join a stranger." Luna's lips curved in a small smile. "Sometimes strangers are easier to talk to than friends. They don't come with expectations or history." The waiter appeared, hovering uncertainly at the threshold. Marco gestured him in, ordering a fresh bottle of wine without consulting the list. His authority was evident even in this simple act. The waiter's immediate nod, the way he withdrew without questions. "I'm Marco," he offered as the waiter returned with the wine. "Just Marco tonight." Luna watched as the ruby liquid splashed into their glasses. "Well, just Marco, what brings you to dine alone on a Thursday evening?" He studied her over the rim of his glass. "A failed attempt at proving something to myself, I suppose. And you?" "Paperwork," she said, her smile fading slightly. "My husband's estate, he passed away 18 months ago, and there are still loose ends to tie up." Marco's expression shifted, softening almost imperceptibly. "I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you." Luna traced the stem of her wineglass. "Everyone always says that time heals, but they never mention how messy the healing process is." "Or how lonely," Marco added quietly. Their eyes met in shared understanding. The restaurant's subtle lighting cast warm shadows across their faces, creating an intimate bubble that seemed to exclude the rest of the world. "What happened?" Luna asked gently, gesturing towards his wheelchair. "If you don't mind me asking." Marco was silent for a moment, swirling the wine in his glass. "A security incident," he said finally. "The doctors say I won't walk again." "Recent?" 6 weeks. His jaw tightened. Everything changed in seconds. Luna nodded, not offering platitudes or false hope. "Loss is like that. Instant and permanent. One moment you're whole, the next you're reinventing yourself around an absence." The evening crowd thinned around them, other diners paying their bills and departing. Neither Marco nor Luna seemed to notice, too absorbed in their conversation. "How did you do it?" Marco asked. "Move forward after such loss?" "Slowly, imperfectly." Luna's fingers played with her napkin. "I stopped trying to be who I was before, started figuring out who I could be now." "And who is that?" "Still working on it." She smiled, a genuine expression that reached her eyes. "But I'm learning to be okay with the uncertainty." Marco leaned back in his wheelchair, his posture relaxing slightly. "Earlier today, someone told me I needed to get back to normal, as if normal still exists." "Normal is overrated," Luna said, "and usually just means making other people comfortable with your pain." A surprised laugh escaped Marco. "That's remarkably accurate." Their conversation flowed easily, touching on grief and healing, purpose and identity. Luna spoke of her husband's sudden illness, the way it had forced her to redefine everything she thought she knew about life. Marco shared the frustration of dependency, the rage at his body's betrayal. The restaurant grew quieter around them. Waiters cleared nearby tables, but none dared interrupt the intense discussion in the private room. Marco's security team remained vigilant but discreet, blending into the background. "I should go," Luna said finally, noticing they were the last guests remaining. "I've kept you far too long." "Time well spent," Marco replied. He gestured to one of his men, who stepped forward immediately. "Let me arrange a car for you? The city isn't safe this late." Luna started to protest, but something in Marco's expression stopped her. "Thank you," she said instead. "That's very kind." As they waited for the car, Marco studied her profile in the dim light. She was beautiful, yes, but it was more than that. She carried her strength quietly, wore her vulnerability without shame. In her presence, his wheelchair felt less like a prison and more like just another fact of his existence. "Will you be in the city long?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "A few more days," Luna replied. "The lawyers need signatures on final documents." The car arrived, sleek and black with tinted windows. Marco's man held the door open for Luna, his posture professional and respectful. "Thank you for the company," Luna said, turning to Marco one last time. "And the conversation." "The pleasure was mine," Marco responded, meaning it more than he had meant anything in weeks. As the car pulled away, Marco remained in place, watching until the taillights disappeared into the night traffic. Without him having to say a word, one of his men stepped forward with a phone, ready to relay instructions. "Follow her," Marco said quietly, discreetly. "I want to know where she's staying." The man nodded and moved away, already speaking softly into his phone. Marco wheeled himself toward his own waiting vehicle, his mind full of dark eyes and honest words. For the first time since the shooting, he felt something stirring in his chest. Not quite hope, but perhaps its distant cousin. Luna had seen him, really seen him, not as a crime boss or an invalid, but as a man wrestling with loss. She had offered neither pity nor fear, just understanding and genuine connection. The city lights blurred past his window as his driver navigated the late-night streets. Marco thought about Luna's words about reinventing oneself around an absence. Perhaps that was the key. Not fighting to reclaim what was lost, but building something new from what remained. His phone buzzed with a message from his surveillance team. Luna's hotel address, her room number, the length of her planned stay. Marco stored the information away, not yet sure what he would do with it, only knowing he wasn't ready to let this connection fade into memory. The restaurant staff began their final cleanup, wiping down tables and stacking chairs. In the private dining room, 2 wine glasses still sat on the table, bearing lipstick marks and fingerprints, temporary evidence of an unexpected encounter that had changed something fundamental in both participants. Outside, the city continued its nocturnal pulse, unaware that in a quiet restaurant, 2 wounded souls had recognized themselves in each other. Cars honked, people hurried past, and somewhere in the darkness, Luna was returning to her hotel, equally unaware that she had captured the attention of one of the city's most dangerous men. The night held its secrets close, wrapped in the promise of possibilities yet to unfold. For now it was enough that they had shared this moment, this honest exchange between strangers who understood loss intimately. Tomorrow would bring its own complications, but tonight had opened a door that neither Marco nor Luna had expected to find. The morning sun cast long shadows across Marco's penthouse as he studied the tablet before him. His security chief had delivered preliminary information on Luna Moretti with his breakfast, standard background checks revealing a life as honest as her eyes suggested. 34 years old, widowed 11 months ago, Marco read aloud, scrolling through the report. No criminal record, no suspicious financial activity. He paused on a photo of Luna at what appeared to be a community fundraiser, her smile genuine as she helped serve meals to the elderly. The background check wasn't about finding dirt. Marco needed to ensure she wasn't connected to his rivals, that bringing her closer wouldn't put her in danger. Everything he saw only confirmed his instincts about her character. His fingers hovered over his phone. It had been years since he'd felt nervous about calling someone, but something about Luna made him feel like a regular man again. Taking a deep breath, he dialed. "Hello?" Her voice was warm, if surprised. "Luna, it's Marco." He kept his tone casual. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all. I was just finishing some paperwork." "I enjoyed our conversation last night," he said, wheeling himself toward the window. "I wondered if you might join me for lunch today." There was a pause, not reluctant, but considering. "I'd like that," she finally replied. Marco arranged to have her picked up at noon, selecting a quiet bistro where his presence wouldn't draw attention. As his driver helped him into the car later that morning, he found himself checking his appearance in the reflection of the tinted windows, another gesture that felt foreign after months of indifference. Luna was already seated when he arrived, wearing a simple blue dress that made her eyes shine. She stood to greet him, her smile genuine but carrying a hint of wariness that told him she wasn't completely naive about the power that surrounded him. "Thank you for coming," Marco said as he positioned his wheelchair at the table. "Thank you for asking." Luna settled back into her seat. "Though I have to admit, the car service was a bit elaborate for lunch." Marco smiled. "I prefer to ensure my guests' comfort and safety." Their conversation flowed easily as they ordered, discussing books and travel until their food arrived. Marco found himself sharing more than he intended about the aftermath of his injury. The physical pain wasn't the worst part, he admitted, pushing pasta around his plate. It was the isolation. People either avoid me entirely or treat me like I'm made of glass. Luna's eyes met his, understanding, rather than pitying. After James died, people didn't know how to act around me either. They'd cross the street to avoid having to make conversation. You didn't let it break you, Marco observed. Neither did you. She took a sip of water. Though I suspect you're still fighting it. Her perception was unsettling and refreshing at once. Marco leaned forward slightly. Where are you staying while you're in the city? The Parkview Hotel, Luna replied. Nothing fancy, but it's clean. Marco frowned. The Parkview was in a deteriorating neighborhood, barely 3 stars. That area isn't safe, especially for a woman alone. I'm careful, Luna assured him. Besides, it's only for a few more days. Stay at my place, Marco said, before he could stop himself. Seeing her startled expression, he added, I have plenty of room. You'd be more comfortable, and I'd worry less. Luna set down her fork, studying him. That's very generous, but we barely know each other. True, Marco acknowledged. But I think we both know there's something here worth exploring. He gestured to the space between them. You'd have complete privacy, your own suite, no expectations. She was silent for a long moment, weighing something in her mind. The city does make me nervous sometimes, she admitted, especially at night. Then let me help. Marco's voice was gentle, but carried an undercurrent of authority that suggested he was used to getting his way. Luna took another sip of water, then nodded slowly. All right, but just until I finish with the lawyers. Marco signaled for the check, trying to contain his satisfaction. Within an hour, his men had collected Luna's belongings from the Parkview and transferred them to his estate. The sun was setting when Luna arrived at the gates of Marco's property. Her eyes widened as the heavy iron barriers swung open, revealing manicured gardens and a massive Mediterranean-style mansion. Armed guards stood at attention, their presence both professional and intimidating. Marco waited in the marble-floored foyer as his driver helped Luna from the car. He watched her take in the palatial surroundings, the soaring ceilings, the priceless art, the clear signs of wealth and power that he could no longer hide. This is... Luna's voice trailed off as she stepped inside. More than you expected? Marco supplied, noting how small she looked amid the grandeur. Who are you, really? She asked quietly, her eyes meeting his. Marco wheeled closer, close enough to see the pulse beating in her throat. Someone who wants to know you better, he answered carefully. The rest we can discuss later. A member of his household staff appeared silently to show Luna to her suite. As she followed the woman up the curved staircase, Luna glanced back at Marco. In her eyes, he saw the realization that she had crossed a threshold, not just physically, but into a world of power and secrets she couldn't fully comprehend. Marco remained in the foyer long after she disappeared upstairs, thinking about the delicate balance he needed to maintain. Luna's presence in his home made her both more vulnerable and more protected. She had stepped into his world willingly, but without understanding its true nature. His phone buzzed with a message from his security team. Luna's suite was prepared, with subtle surveillance in place for her protection. Another message confirmed that background checks were continuing, expanding to her extended network of contacts. The mansion settled into evening quietness, broken only by the soft footsteps of staff and the distant sound of waves against the private beach below. Somewhere above him, Luna was unpacking in a suite larger than her entire hotel room, perhaps wondering what she had gotten herself into. Marco wheeled himself to his study, where reports awaited his attention, but his mind kept drifting to the woman upstairs. Her honest words, her perceptive gaze, the way she looked at him as a man rather than a symbol of power or object of pity. The security feeds showed Luna exploring her suite, running her fingers over expensive fabrics, standing on the balcony to watch the sunset. She looked both enchanted and uncertain, like a person who had stumbled into a fairy tale and wasn't sure if she was meeting the prince or the dragon. As night fell fully, Marco's men took their positions around the property's perimeter. In the kitchen, staff prepared a private dinner that would be served in Luna's suite. Everything was proceeding according to Marco's wishes, yet he felt an unfamiliar tension, the weight of responsibility for bringing an innocent into his complicated world. Through the study's windows, he could see lights coming on in Luna's suite, warm against the darkening sky. She had accepted his invitation, crossed his threshold, and now resided under his protection. What she didn't yet know was that in his world, protection and possession often meant the same thing. The marble floors echoed with their footsteps as Elena, the housekeeper, led Luna up the sweeping staircase. Luna's fingers traced the polished banister, cool and smooth beneath her touch. The second floor opened into a wide hallway lined with antique mirrors and oil paintings that probably cost more than her old house. "You're sweet, miss," Elena said, opening a set of double doors. Luna stepped inside and caught her breath. The space was larger than her entire apartment, decorated in creams and soft blues that reminded her of the ocean. A sitting area with plush armchairs faced floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the gardens and beyond them the glittering sea. "The bedroom is through here," Elena continued, leading Luna through an archway. "And your private bathroom is just beyond. Will you be joining Mr. Marco for dinner?" I'm not sure," Luna said, still trying to process the opulence surrounding her. "He's requested dinner be served here, if you prefer." Elena's tone was carefully neutral, but Luna caught the slight emphasis on requested, as if Marco's requests were always granted without question. "Here would be nice, thank you." Luna needed time to think, to understand what she'd gotten herself into. After Elena left, Luna explored the suite. The bathroom was all marble and gold fixtures, with a soaking tub big enough for 3 people. The bedroom held a king-size bed, draped in silk, and a walk-in closet where her few belongings looked lost among the empty space. Through the windows, she watched men in dark suits patrol the grounds with military precision. They moved like shadows, alert and coordinated. When Marco appeared below, wheeling himself along a garden path, 2 guards fell into step beside him without being summoned. A soft knock announced dinner's arrival. 2 staff members wheeled in a cart laden with covered dishes, setting up an intimate table by the windows. The china was delicate, the crystal sparkling, the silver heavy and ornate. Minutes later, Marco arrived, navigating his chair with practiced ease. "I hope you're settling in," he said, his dark eyes studying her face. "It's overwhelming," Luna admitted, taking her seat across from him. "You said this was family property." "Yes." Marco's pause was almost imperceptible. "Old money, old responsibilities." He gestured for her to begin eating. "The weight of generations." Luna cut into perfectly cooked salmon, wondering about the lie she sensed beneath his words. Everything about this place spoke of active power, not inherited wealth gathering dust. "Your staff seems very—" She searched for the right word. "Dedicated." "They're loyal," Marco agreed. His shoulders tensed slightly as he shifted in his chair, a flicker of discomfort crossing his face. Luna noticed immediately. "Are you in pain?" "It's nothing." But his jaw was tight, his knuckles white on his armrests. "It's not nothing." Luna stood, moving around the table. "What do you need?" Marco hesitated, pride warring with trust in his expression. "In my jacket pocket, small blue pill bottle." Luna retrieved the medication, noting how his hands trembled slightly as he took it. She poured water, stayed close as he swallowed the pill. Without thinking, she placed her hand on his shoulder, feeling the tension in his muscles. "The doctors say it will improve," he said quietly. "But some days are harder," Luna finished. Her fingers moved gently, instinctively working at the knot of muscle beneath his collar. "I remember with David, after his diagnosis. The good days made the bad ones harder somehow." Marco's head dropped forward slightly, allowing her better access to his neck. The vulnerability of the gesture struck her. This powerful man, letting her see his weakness. "You don't have to be strong all the time," she murmured, continuing the gentle massage. "Not with me." His breath caught. For a moment, the only sounds were the distant waves and the whisper of her hands moving against his shirt. Then he reached up, caught her wrist gently. "Luna." The way he said her name made her shiver. His thumb traced circles on her pulse point, and the air between them grew thick with unspoken things. "We should finish dinner," she said softly, reluctantly withdrawing her hand. The rest of the meal passed in comfortable conversation, but something had shifted. Every time their eyes met, Luna felt the echo of that intimate moment. As the staff cleared away the dishes, Marco paused at the door. "Thank you," he said simply. "For seeing me, not just—" He gestured at the wheelchair. "Thank you for letting me see you," Luna replied. After he left, Luna changed into silk pajamas she found in the closet. They fit perfectly, making her wonder if Elena had arranged them. She stood on the balcony, watching the moonlight silver the waves while guards moved like shadows below. In his own chambers, Marco lay awake, remembering the feeling of Luna's hands on his shoulders, the gentleness in her touch. His body ached with wanting her, not just physically, but completely. Her compassion, her strength, her unflinching honesty. But the lies between them grew heavier with each passing hour. She didn't know who he really was, what his world would demand of her. Every moment he kept the truth from her, added another layer of guilt to his desire. He wheeled to the window, looking up at the light still burning in her suite. She was so close, just upstairs, yet separated from him by walls of secrets. His weakness, his salvation, his temptation, all wrapped up in one woman who had walked into his life and seen straight through his defenses to the man beneath. Marco pressed his forehead against the cool glass, tormented by wanting what he shouldn't have, needing what he didn't deserve. The pain medication dulled his physical discomfort but did nothing for the ache in his chest. In the security room, cameras showed Luna finally turning off her lights. Marco watched the screen go dark, knowing sleep would elude him tonight. Every breath drew him deeper into this impossible situation, falling for a woman who knew nothing of his true nature, who might run screaming if she discovered the violence and power that built his empire. The night stretched on, filled with the whispers of waves and the soft footsteps of guards changing shifts. Throughout the mansion, life continued its careful choreography of power and protection. But in two separate rooms, two people lay awake, each haunted by the growing pull between them, each afraid of what tomorrow might bring. The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors as Luna wandered the east wing of the estate. A guard followed at a discreet distance. For her safety, they'd said. His footsteps echoed softly behind her, a constant reminder that she wasn't truly alone. The mansion was beautiful, but felt more like a fortress than a home. Crystal chandeliers caught the light, throwing rainbow patterns across walls adorned with priceless art. Yet steel reinforced the windows, and security cameras blinked silently from corners. Luna paused at a window overlooking the gardens. 3 men in dark suits patrolled the grounds, hands never far from their jackets. She'd noticed more of them arriving early this morning, their faces grim as they hurried inside. "Miss Moretti?" The guard behind her cleared his throat. "Some areas are restricted. Perhaps we should return to the main wing." She nodded, turning away from the window. As they walked back, she caught fragments of heated conversation from behind closed doors. Marco's voice, harder than she'd ever heard it, speaking rapid Italian. In his study, Marco sat rigidly in his wheelchair, surrounded by his most trusted men. Reports of growing unrest within the family had been arriving all morning. Some saw his injury as weakness, an opportunity to seize power. "The Russo faction is moving against us, his consigliere reported quietly. "They think you're vulnerable now." Marco's expression hardened. "Then we remind them why they feared me before the chair." His voice was ice. "Bring me Antonio. He's been feeding them information." The morning bled into afternoon. Luna explored the library, trying to ignore the steady stream of men entering and leaving. Marco's study. Their faces were masks of careful neutrality, but tension radiated from them like heat. She was returning from the garden when she heard it, a sharp cry, quickly muffled, coming from a room she'd been told was off-limits. The door was slightly ajar. Before her guard could stop her, Luna glanced inside. The scene burned itself into her memory. Marco sat in his wheelchair, expression cold and remote as 2 men held a third between them. Blood dripped from the captive's face onto the expensive carpet. "You betrayed my trust, Antonio." Marco's voice was terrifyingly calm. "You endangered my family." "Please," Antonio gasped. "I can explain." "There is nothing to explain." Marco made a slight gesture. One of his men drew a knife. Luna stumbled backward, a small sound escaping her throat. Marco's head snapped up, his eyes meeting hers for one frozen moment before her guard pulled her away, hustling her back to the main wing. She paced her suite for hours, shaking. The Marco she'd known, gentle, vulnerable Marco, who let her massage his shoulders, seemed a stranger compared to the man she'd glimpsed. How could they be the same person? The sun was setting when he finally came to her. He didn't apologize or try to excuse what she'd seen. He simply wheeled into her sitting room and waited, watching her with those dark, unreadable eyes. "Who are you?" Luna whispered. "Really?" "You know who I am." His voice was soft but firm. "Everything between us has been real, but this is also who I am, a man who protects what's his by whatever means necessary. By torture, murder," her voice cracked. "By whatever it takes." He moved closer, and she forced herself not to step back. The world I live in isn't gentle, Luna. But everything I do, every life I take or spare, serves a purpose, protecting my family, my territory, my people. He paused. Protecting you. A shiver ran through her. I don't need that kind of protection. You do now. His eyes were intense. The moment you walked into my life, you became mine to protect. I won't apologize for keeping you safe. I'm not yours, Luna said, but her voice wavered. Despite her fear, despite everything she'd seen, her body still responded to his presence, his power. Aren't you? He wheeled closer until she could feel the heat radiating from him. Tell me you don't feel this. Tell me you want to walk away. Luna closed her eyes, trembling. She could still see the blood on the carpet, the cold efficiency in Marco's movements. But she also remembered his vulnerability, his gentleness, the way he looked at her like she was something precious. I'm afraid, she admitted. Good. His hand found hers, thumb tracing her palm. Fear keeps you alive. But know this, you have nothing to fear from me. My violence isn't for you, never for you. Luna opened her eyes, meeting his gaze. The contrast between his gentle touch and what she'd witnessed earlier made her head spin. This was a man who could order death without blinking, yet handled her like she was made of glass. How do you do it? She whispered. Switch between tenderness and brutality so easily? Because both are equally part of who I am. His grip tightened slightly. I won't pretend to be less than I am, Luna. I won't hide my nature or apologize for it. But I will promise you this. Everything soft in me, everything gentle, belongs to you, alone. The words sent heat coursing through her veins, warring with her fear. She should run. She should be horrified. Instead, she found herself swaying toward him, drawn by the dark promise in his eyes. Stay, he murmured. Stay and let me show you both sides of my world. The luxury and the violence, the terror and the beauty. Stay and be mine, knowing exactly what that means. Luna's breath caught. The smart thing would be to leave now, before she was in too deep. But as darkness fell outside and Marco's presence filled her senses, she wasn't sure she could. The pull between them was too strong, the desire too intense. In her chest, fear and want tangled together until she couldn't tell them apart. She stood frozen between flight and surrender, between the safety of ignorance and the dangerous allure of Marco's truth. The night pressed in around them, full of unspoken promises and barely contained violence. Tomorrow, Luna knew, she would have to make her choice, but for now she let herself drown in Marco's dark gaze, trembling on the knife's edge between terror and desire. Guards moved silently through the mansion, protecting their master and his chosen woman. In his study, blood still stained the carpet where Antonio had learned the price of betrayal. And in Luna's suite, two people stood suspended in a moment of truth, while the weight of Marco's world settled around them like a crown of thorns. The moonlight spilled through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across Luna's sitting room. She stood with her arms wrapped around herself, watching Marco as he sat in his wheelchair, the space between them charged with unspoken tension. The events of the afternoon still played behind her eyes, the violence, the power, the absolute control he'd shown. I can hear you thinking, Marco said softly, breaking the silence. His dark eyes never left her face. Ask what you need to ask. Luna drew a shaky breath. How many people have you killed? Enough to keep my people safe. Enough to maintain order. His voice was steady, unflinching. I won't pretend to be something I'm not, Luna. Not anymore. She moved closer, drawn despite her fear. And what are you? A man who built an empire on blood and loyalty. His hands gripped the arms of his wheelchair. A man who would burn the world to protect what's his. The intensity in his voice made her shiver. Is that what I am? Something to possess? Marco wheeled forward, closing the distance between them until she could feel the heat radiating from his body. You're everything, he said roughly. My weakness, my strength. The one person who sees me as a man first, not just power in a chair. Luna's heart thundered in her chest. She should run, should be terrified of the darkness she saw in him. Instead, she found herself reaching out, fingers trailing along his jaw. His stubble scraped against her skin. He caught her wrist, grip firm but gentle. Don't start something you're not ready to finish, Kara. I'm not afraid of you, she whispered, though they both knew it wasn't entirely true. You should be. His thumb traced circles on her pulse point. I'm not a good man, Luna. But for you, only for you, I can be gentle. The words sent heat pooling low in her belly. She stepped closer between his parted knees. "Show me." Marco's eyes darkened. In one smooth motion, he pulled her into his lap. She gasped at the feel of him, solid and warm beneath her. His hands slid up her sides, leaving trails of fire in their wake. "Last chance to walk away," he murmured against her throat. Instead of answering, Luna kissed him. The restraint between them shattered. Marco's mouth claimed hers with desperate hunger. Months of isolation and longing poured into the press of his lips. His hands tangled in her hair, holding her close as she melted against him. When they broke apart, both breathing heavily, Marco's eyes were wild. "Bedroom, now!" Luna started to stand, but he kept her in his lap. With practiced ease, he maneuvered his chair through the connecting door to her suite. The journey was punctuated by heated kisses, his mouth leaving marks on her neck that she knew would show tomorrow. At the bed, Luna moved to help him, but Marco stopped her. "Let me show you what I can do," he said, voice rough with desire. With controlled strength, he transferred himself to the bed, then pulled her down beside him. His hands were everywhere, mapping her body with reverent attention. Despite his disability, there was nothing weak about the way he touched her. He proved his power in the arch of her spine, the catch of her breath, the way she came undone beneath his skilled fingers. "Beautiful," he murmured, watching her face as pleasure crashed over her. "So beautiful for me." They came together, slowly, carefully, Marco ensuring her comfort even as passion threatened to overwhelm them both. He may not have had the use of his legs, but the rest of him was pure strength and control. Luna lost herself in the feel of him, in the perfect balance of tenderness and intensity. Afterward, they lay tangled in the sheets, Luna's head on his chest. Marco's fingers combed through her hair, touch gentle now that the urgency had passed. The night pressed close around them, intimate and safe. "I never thought I'd have this again," Marco admitted quietly. "After the injury, I thought that part of my life was over." Luna pressed a kiss to his scarred shoulder. "You're still every inch a man, Marco. The chair doesn't change that." He tightened, his hold on her. "There's so much I should tell you," he started, voice heavy with something that sounded like regret. "Things you need to know." "Then tell me," she whispered. Marco was silent for a long moment. "Not tonight," he finally said. "Tonight, just let me hold you. Let me pretend we're normal people who met by chance and fell in love." The words made Luna's heart skip. Love. It was too soon, too dangerous, but she couldn't deny the truth of it. Whatever Marco was, whatever violence lived in him, she'd already fallen too deep to climb back out. She curled closer, breathing in his scent, expensive cologne, and something uniquely him. Outside, the sky began to lighten, false dawn painting the world in shades of gray. Marco's breathing had evened out, his body relaxed in sleep. Luna fought to keep her eyes open, wanting to memorize this moment. The way his face softened in sleep, making him look younger, almost innocent. The protective curl of his arms around her, the steady beat of his heart beneath her ear. She knew there were still secrets between them, truths he wasn't ready to share. But here, in the quiet hours before sunrise, none of that mattered. She believed in the man who held her so carefully, who looked at her like she was precious. The rest could wait for morning. As sleep finally claimed her, Luna's last thought was of Marco's eyes. Not the cold darkness she'd witnessed that afternoon, but the warm intensity when he'd called her beautiful. That was her truth. Her Marco. Whatever else he might be, that was the man she was falling for. In the growing light, they slept tangled together, two broken people finding wholeness in each other's arms. Marco's men kept silent watch outside, guarding their boss and the woman who had somehow breached his walls. Dawn crept closer, bringing with it the weight of unspoken truths and inevitable revelations. But for now, in this moment, there was only peace. Only the soft sound of shared breath and the warmth of skin against skin. Only a man and a woman, finding shelter in each other while the world waited outside. Luna wandered the estate's halls that afternoon, catching fragments of hushed conversations that died when she approached. The staff's furtive glances and sudden silences made her skin prickle with unease. Near the kitchen, two guards spoke in low tones about territory disputes and rival families, their words cutting off abruptly when they spotted her. Her heart nearly stopped when a man in a dark suit approached her in the garden, stepping out from behind a hedge. "Miss Moretti," he said softly. "I work for the Castellano family. There are things you need to know about Marco De Luca." The truth spilled out like poison. Marco wasn't just wealthy. He was one of the most powerful mafia bosses in the city. The wheelchair hadn't changed that. Every moment they'd shared had been carefully orchestrated, her presence in his home a calculated move in a larger game. Shaking, Luna confronted Marco in his study. "Tell me it isn't true," she pleaded. "Tell me you're not using me." His silence spoke volumes. Pain and betrayal clawed at her chest as she watched him struggle for words that wouldn't come. Before either could speak further, glass shattered. Smoke filled the room. Luna heard shouting, gunfire. Rough hands grabbed her. She fought, screamed Marco's name, but a sweet-smelling cloth covered her mouth. As consciousness faded, she saw Marco's face, twisted in fury and fear. Her last thought was bitter. The man she'd fallen for had never really existed at all. Marco's hands gripped his wheelchair's arms until his knuckles went white. "Find her!" he growled to his enforcers. "Tear this city apart." The pretense of a quiet recovery shattered like glass. Within hours, his organization mobilized with military precision. Screens filled his office, tracking movements across the city in real time. His men, no longer hiding their true nature, moved openly through the streets. "Sir, we've located 3 possible informants," an enforcer reported. Marco's eyes turned cold as ice. "Make them talk." His voice was deadly quiet. "Then make examples of them." Screams echoed through basement interrogation rooms. Names spilled from bloody lips. Each betrayal was met with swift, merciless justice. The city's underworld erupted in chaos as Marco's forces struck simultaneously at multiple rival operations. He wheeled himself through command centers, issuing orders with ruthless efficiency. His disability meant nothing now. His mind was the weapon that had always made him dangerous. "Warehouse District," came the report he'd been waiting for. "Castellanos territory." "Get my car ready," Marco ordered, his face carved from stone. "I'm going personally." His men tried to object but fell silent at his expression. As the armored vehicle sped through darkened streets, Marco checked his weapon. He would show them all that a throne didn't need legs, only the will to destroy anyone who threatened what was his. The warehouse loomed ahead, and Marco's eyes gleamed with deadly purpose. Luna huddled in the corner of the warehouse, wrists bound. Gunfire erupted outside, followed by shouts and screams. The door burst open, and Marco wheeled in, gun raised. His eyes found her instantly. "Get down!" he roared as bullets sprayed through windows. Without hesitation, he propelled his chair forward, shielding her with his body. A bullet grazed his shoulder, but he didn't flinch. His enforcers swarmed in, eliminating threats with brutal efficiency. When silence fell, Marco's hands trembled as he untied her. "Luna," he whispered, voice breaking. "I'm sorry. For everything." In his penthouse later, as dawn crept over the horizon, Marco finally spoke the truth. "I'm Marco DeLuca. I run the largest crime family in this city." His words spilled out about losing his legs in an assassination attempt, about his fear of appearing weak, about meeting her and being unable to let go. "I lied because I was ashamed," he admitted. "Not of who I am, but of thinking you'd see me as less than a man. Now you know everything." He met her eyes. "You can walk away. I'll ensure you're protected, wherever you go. Or you can stay, knowing exactly who and what I am." Luna stood, her voice steady. "I don't need protection. I need truth. I need an equal partner, not an owner. No more lies, no more manipulation. That's my choice." Marco nodded slowly, understanding the weight of her terms. 3 weeks after the warehouse incident, Marco sat in his study reviewing reports. The restructuring of his empire had been swift and absolute. Old alliances built on fear were dismantled, replaced by partnerships founded on mutual benefit. Those who opposed the changes were quietly removed, all to ensure Luna's safety, to build a world where she could exist without looking over her shoulder. Luna entered, carrying 2 glasses of wine. The setting sun painted the penthouse in amber hues, reminiscent of that lonely evening months ago when he'd contemplated disappearing. How different things were now. "The Russo family signed the agreement," she said, setting his glass down. Her understanding of his business had grown rapidly, her sharp mind cutting through complex negotiations. "They had little choice," Marco replied, taking her hand. "The old ways are changing." They moved to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. The same glittering lights that had once mocked his isolation now seemed to celebrate their unity. Luna stood beside his wheelchair, her presence both grounding and electrifying. "I never thought I'd find this," Marco admitted softly. "When I lost my legs, I thought I'd lost everything that made me who I am." With practiced grace, He engaged the wheelchair's brakes and lowered himself to one knee before her. Luna's breath caught, understanding the significance, a man who ruled through power, choosing to kneel. "You showed me strength isn't about standing tall," he said, voice thick with emotion. "It's about falling and rising again, about choosing love over fear." He reached for her hand. "I pledge myself to you, Luna, not as a boss, not as a protector, but as a man who loves you completely." Luna's fingers trembled in his. "The first time we met, you were hiding who you were," she said. "Now you're the most honest man I know." She pulled him up, strong despite his weight, until they were eye to eye. "I choose you, Marco De Luca, not for your power or your empire, but for your heart." They turned to watch the city lights brighten as darkness fell. Marco's arm wrapped around her waist, secure in the knowledge that his greatest strength now came from vulnerability, not violence. Together they had built something unbreakable, a partnership forged in truth, tempered by danger and sustained by love. In the reflection of the window, they saw themselves clearly. Two souls who had found each other in darkness and chosen to walk in light, different yet perfectly matched, dangerous yet tender, and finally, irrevocably whole. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.